Executive Vice President for Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. We will kick off this evening first by hearing a few words from our chapter president, Richard Watson. Rich?
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Yvette. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This is going to be a wonderful program. We're going to hear a lot of good things that's going to definitely show a great appreciation for women during this important month. First, my name is Richard Watson. I'm the president of comto-ny. For those who are not familiar with comto, comto is the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. We are a nationally recognized organization for our advocacy because we really work on leveling the playing field in the transportation industry for veterans, people with different abilities, and for minorities. And I can say lightly right now nationally because comto is growing. So soon we'll be continental and one day global. But this evening, I just want to say that, this is going to be a great conversation. This program is definitely something that is worthy and timely. As we know, women, they continue to exhibit themselves in the space of politics. They become some great influences. Their political capital right now, it impacts elections and it impacts the priorities that our elected officials are pursuing. So, I don't want to steal their thunder. I'm gonna step aside because I know my role this evening is for the women to enjoy themselves as we have this great conversation about their political influence, their political capital. So with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Yvette and sit back and I'm going to enjoy tonight's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you. Again, my name is Yvette Janniere-Houlder, the Executive Vice President for comto-ny. This month is Women's History Month, but it is literally just one fraction of the representation that women bring to the world as a whole. And when asked to put this program together, it was kind of hard to fit everything into one evening and one event. And so that's how we came up with a 3-part series. And so our overall theme, which aligns with the National Women's History Month theme, is Valiant Women of the Vote, Refusing to be Silenced. And so with a title like that, we felt our very first series really needed to speak to the political capital that women bring to the table. And so tonight we will hear from 2 very prominent women in the political area, Charlyn Stanberry, who is a representative at Yvette D. Clark's office. She is the Chief of Staff, as well as Lakeila Stemmons, who is the National Director for Higher Heights. And we will hear a little more about what Higher Heights is doing in the political realm. Our other 2 series, which will follow the second one on March 18th, will be focused on the now generation of transportation leaders. So we will have both 2 speakers from the public sector and 2 speakers from the private sector, each who are in the C-suite, some that are leading transportation agencies, others that are executives in the private sector itself. And our final session will focus on women entrepreneurs in transportation. And so many of you will know that there's consulting firms throughout the world who work with public sector agencies as well as private sector agencies to assist them in being able to execute their requests for proposals. So they bring in a specific type of expertise and they work with public sector and private sector organizations to do various types of implementations, constructions, et cetera. And it is a $1 trillion industry. And so we will speak with 4 executives who own their own firms. And I just think that each one of these brings together just real highlights on the journeys that many women have gone in various areas. And so tonight I will turn back to our evening event, and I will introduce to you our two speakers. Our first speaker, sorry, I'm gonna get my bios up for my two speakers. Lakeila R. Stemmons. Lakeila is an attorney and strategist with an accomplished record of helping attorneys, business leaders, civil rights and social justice advocates, etc., develop and execute strategic plans and policy initiatives that advance progressive agendas. Her consulting firm, Stemmons Strategies, has worked to increase voting rights, healthcare access, and economic development in distressed communities and collaborative initiatives that advance diversity and inclusion. As the National Director for Higher Heights for America, the only national organization providing Black women with a political home exclusively dedicated to harnessing their power to expand Black women's elected representation and voting participation. Stemmons is focused on expanding membership and engagement strategy. She also manages strategic partnerships and major campaigns such as Black Women Vote. Ms. Stemmons holds an MBA in finance and received her law degree from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Our second panelist, Charlyn Stanberry, currently serves as Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Yvette D. Clark. Previously, Charlyn served as Congresswoman Clark's Legislative Director and Counsel, Vice President of External Affairs for Net Communications, Counsel for the Multicultural Media, Telecom and Internet Council, and professional staff for the Congressional Black Caucus. During the 2016 Hillary for American campaign, Charlyn served as a regional voter protection director in Florida, where she was in charge of recruiting over 800 volunteer attorneys for early voting and election day, advocating for early voting across the state and serving as an internal legal resource for the campaign. Charlyn earned her JD from Florida International University's College of Law and her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Masters of Public Administration from the University of Central Florida. I'd like to welcome both of our panelists. And with no further ado, we will jump right into our very first question. And again, for any of those who joined us after we got started, the chat box is there. Feel free to submit any questions that you have there, and or when we open up the floor for questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask your question there. So politics impacts nearly every aspect of our lives, particularly access and equity. So what do we mean when we say access? Access refers to fair and equitable access to services such as education, healthcare, employment, public safety, and transportation. When we say equity, we're referring to the distribution of economic, social, and political resources, regardless of age, gender, race, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, or income. So as the first question that we want to have for discussion is, can you share with us the importance of voter awareness and ways that Higher Heights is driving success in this area?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Just to give an overview, so in case some of you do not know what Higher Heights is, or if you've never heard of us before, we are the only national organization providing Black women with a political home exclusively dedicated to harnessing their political power to expand Black women's elected representation and voter participation and advancing progressive policies. We are a 501c4 and also a 501c3, and we also have a connected PAC to our 501c4. And our suite of organizations are building the political power and leadership of Black women from the voting booth to elected office, and creating the environment where Black women to run, win, and lead. We are an organization founded by Black women for Black women's political growth and equity. We have a winning plan that to build collective political power and expand Black women's elected leadership. We've invested in the next generation of political leaders. We are mobilizing and organizing the power of Black women voters through our Black Women Vote campaign. And we are creating an environment for Black women to run, to vote, to win, and to lead through our online trainings, research, cultural shifting, communications work, and our digital campaigns. Basically for us, our voice, our vote, that's our power. And our goal is to make sure that we have informed voters in the ecosystem, because to us, all politics are local.
I was on mute, sorry. Charlyn, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Lakeila was perfect, but I work for Congresswoman Yvette Clark, who represents the Congressional District of New York 09, which is Central and South Brooklyn. And she was perfect when she said all politics is local. Even though I work in federal politics, a lot of my job is figuring out how to do this fine thread and this balance when it comes to local and state politics. So it's definitely about people being informed on the ground and also on a national scale.
Excellent. Awesome. Alicia, I'll ask if there are any questions as yet before we move into the second question.
No questions as of yet.
Okay. All right. So women are constantly reinventing themselves, from mother to educator to supporter, mentor, leader, etc. Can you share with us the importance of having women influencers at the political table and how Higher Heights work supports this?
I think, one of the things that I think it's imperative for us to look at, especially coming off of 2020, the 2020 election cycle, I think we're all like just happy and overjoyed that we have Vice President Kamala D. Harris. But I think one of the things to point out is that as she went from senator to a vice president, we currently have 0 Black women serving in the United States Senate. And while we have had a record number of women running for the House of Representatives, at the end of the day, we are 4.9% of members of Congress, and compared to the fact that we are 4.7% of the population. And so I think we need to hone in on that, because at the end of the day, when you're not at the decision-making table, other people are making decisions about you. And so the fact that Higher Heights just hones in and digs deep and makes sure that we are building a democracy for us, but one that also looks like us. Charlyn, I know you have a lot to say about
and we're close friends. You can see we already mesh off of each other. But, I think of this also about the seat my boss currently holds. She holds Shirley Chisholm's seat. And, Shirley Chisholm, first African-American woman in Congress, first Caribbean-American woman in Congress. If you don't have a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair. You always want to have representation about issues that are important to you. And one thing that Lakeila said that I think is key is also coming off the 2020 election cycle. The Black woman vote is the vote that everyone wanted to have, right? So in addition to the Black woman vote, what are those key issues that affect Black women? Those key issues are going to be the central focus point of a political and policy agenda when we have people that look at the table like us. So for example, Senator Harris, Vice President Harris, so many titles that she has now, introduced in the Senate a uterine fibroids bill, which my boss introduced on the House side. Uterine fibroids is something that a lot of Black women face, including myself. But if we didn't have Congresswoman Clark or, you know, Madam Vice President Harris at the table, that would be an issue that probably wouldn't be a bill concept that people would think of.
Great points, great points. I know that there's been several women who you guys have supported at Higher Heights to get onto ballots, and some that were even elected. Do you want to share any of those stories with us this evening?
I'm sure. You know, a Higher Heights, that is what we are. That is what we are known for. And so I would say, you know, I will just give an example of, you know, from Titch James to Attorney General Titch James to Congresswoman Ayanna Presley to, you know, Cori Bush. I think it is imperative just to know that, you know, Black women are mobilizers. And I think it's meant to be understood and honed in on that we don't go to the polls alone. So it's oftentimes easy to mobilize around the Black women candidates, but it's not just candidates that are at the statewide level or at the federal level that need support. You also need support and infrastructure for Black women who are running for local office. And I think sometimes we miss that mark because we start focusing on the bigger races and we don't necessarily pay attention to who's running for school board or who's running for county commissioner. And those are the races that impact you on a daily basis. And so one of the things that, you know, we talk about is what does it mean to be involved in the political ecosystem, right? It's more than just voting on election day. It could also mean investing in your candidates by donating, or it could be by encouraging your friends to run for office. And so I think there's just a new way to look at how do you build your political power and what does that mean? And whether or not it's you as the influencer or it's someone else, it comes down to if we want to be represented, if we want to have a seat at the table, we literally have to create a plan, be flexible with that plan, but to have an end goal in sight. Because
Indeed.
even, you know, just looking at 2020, I think that was a year that none of us going into 2020 expected to have, right? I don't think anybody's vision board would have included a global pandemic. A global pandemic where Black women, if you're looking at the workforce, we are 4 times more likely to be in a service role or a frontline worker. And so COVID hit us in different ways than it may have hit other demographics, whether or not because we had to make the decision of do we go to work or do we protect our families? Whether or not we're going to work, but we live in a multi-generational household where I go to work, but I also care for my grandmother or my mother or older family member who may have been at a higher risk. And what does that mean when I have to go to work because I'm the only working person in the family? And so those are things to think about when you're talking about representation and what it means and the impact of elections and why they matter. They matter because even today, as you're looking at the distribution of the vaccine, the question is it equitable? Is everyone getting access to a vaccine? And those are the questions that you have to ask. And if you have concerns about them, my whole thing is your vote is your power, your vote is your voice, and that's how you can exercise it.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing that. And I do see we have some questions that are coming in. The first one is, what will it take to grow and sustain the presence of women in politics?
Shar, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll add a little tidbit. I think Lakeila was getting at something that we don't think about a lot, is that you have to create an infrastructure and a pipeline. So in addition to creating this infrastructure where you have Black women everywhere, so you have Black women that are running for office, Black women who are campaign managers, Black women who are in finance managers when it comes to these campaigns, communications managers and directors when it comes to this campaign. You know, even from the Black woman on the street that's passing out the literature to go vote for this person or to go vote. We need that 24/7. So we need that infrastructure, but we need a pipeline. And that's what Lakeila and Higher Heights and different organizations are doing, because I think sometimes Black women, we do a lot of stuff and we don't get credit for it. Some of this stuff I think about my great grandmother are automatically doing. She's automatically making sure that I used to have the literature of who's running for office, that I know who to vote for, that I know where to vote. So I think that it's time for us to get that credit and that worth for what we do automatically, and just make sure we have that infrastructure and that pipeline and appropriate investment in that pipeline.
Well said. Awesome. Okay, the next question we have is, there is currently an attempt to suppress the vote. What are some strategies you feel women can employ to address this?
Definitely voter education. I think you should automatically assume and understand, right? You should automatically assume that there's going to be some form of voter suppression present. The question is, how do you get around it? And that is by giving more access to the ballot box, and to know that you have to make sure that everyone in your community, everyone in your network is actually going to vote. That means picking up the phone, calling 10 of your girlfriends, 10 of your friends, 10 of your sorority sisters, fraternity brothers, you know, your church members, just making sure that your network is actually going out to vote. Because, you know, there's a saying that when Black women go to the polls, we don't go to the polls alone. We bring our friends with us, we bring our communities, we bring, you know, our colleagues. And so just making sure that you know what the regulations are for your state, your county, your city, and that you have a safe vote plan. Like, don't wait till the last minute to go vote, because anything can happen, right? And so create a plan, like know what time you're going to the polls, know if you're going to have to stand in line, do you have, you know, the proper PPE, how long are you going to be in line, or can you do a mail-in? You know, what does that look like? And so the best way to beat voter suppression is to actually expand access to the ballot box. And you do that by making sure that you and everyone in your community, everyone in your circle is voting, and that they're doing the same.
And I just want to add, because Lakeila's being modest, because she's been in voter protection and voting rights for over 10 years and worked on several campaigns when it comes to this, including the Senate races that just occurred in Georgia. Another thing that, just to add on to what she was saying, is think about the fact that a lot of people don't want us to vote, because just like Lakeila said, it's not just one person voting when we vote, we bring a whole entourage. There are going to be misinformation campaigns out there. So this is the techie side of me, that when you're doing your voter education, make sure you're going to the appropriate resources. It's not just Twitter that you click on a link, or Facebook where you click on a certain post. They've targeted us before. You know, make sure you're going to ballot resources. If it's the New York mayoral race, go to the New York City Mayor's Office website, or the Board of Elections website that has all the information there, so that you can just copy and compare to make sure you're not being targeted when it comes to misinformation campaigns.
That's a very good point. I can remember many of elections where I had my girls down there at the call site making calls, because sometimes, you know, it's not just the elections that are happening in your area, but it's also being there to assist in getting the word out in other areas as well. So, you know, I mean, Stacey Adams, you know, she was one of the candidates that, you know, there was a really big call across the nation to just kind of ensure that people were calling and getting information out and seeing if there were buses or ways to get people from their homes to the voting boxes. You know, we don't think about it, but a lot of our elderly, sometimes they're right on our block and we don't even think about it, you know, and just, you know, having that friendly hello makes you just kind of have that interaction. And when it's time for things like that, you know, you just ask the question, ring the bell, ask the question, you know, do you have a way to get to the ballots? So yeah, thank you definitely for sharing that. And we have, I think, another question here. How do we find out where we are needed most in government leadership?
Oh, we're needed at every single level at government leadership. There is a need for us to be at the table. You're needed everywhere, whether it's, you know, like I said, a local office, or whether it's the vice, you know, as the vice president of the United States. You should always see an opening as an opportunity to have your voice heard. So I would say that Black women are needed on every single level of government.
Excellent. And I think this one is geared toward Charlyn. What are the chances of New York electing a female mayor?
So I mean, currently I know everyone's looking at this New York City mayoral race. It's a little bit of everybody, a little bit of flavor for every type of candidate under the sun, including Andrew Yang, right? There are several Black women, including the Afro-Latina woman who is currently running for mayor. I think that, you know, you never know. This is going to be one of the first mayoral races where there's ranked choice voting. I know that was one of the questions that we were kind of getting at, but as a New York City voter, when you go to the ballot box to vote for mayor, you're going to be able to choose who your top 5 selections are. So we never know what could happen. And a lot of people's first and second top selections, it may be a Black woman. But like Lakeila said, let's keep it going. It's not just for this one race for New York City mayor. We have so many other elections that are coming up. So it would be great just to have representation all around.
There was a question, and I think we may have missed it, but Rich Watson asked, what will it take to grow and sustain the presence of women in politics? And I think that's like a very important question that I don't want to skip over. And that is, you know, what I call political philanthropy. Specifically when you're talking about Black women, or I would say Black people in general, we tend to be very philanthropic, whether it's paying our sorority dues, whether it's our fraternity dues or our tithes, or, you know, your annual membership to the NAACP. We are philanthropic by nature. And so, you know, everyone sometimes gets caught up based on like, well, I don't have $500 to give a candidate, I can't afford it, but actually you can. You know, candidates, even if you give them, you know, $5 a week, $10 a month, like it's just getting in that habit of financially supporting the people that you believe in. That is how you sustain and continue to build Black women's political power, and that is by financially investing in them. Campaigns are not cheap. Campaigns require money, and if we want to see more Black women in political office, we have to financially support them.
So you mentioned the ranked voting. That was one of the reasons that they instituted ranked choice voting, was because of the expense of having to have runoff voting, correct? Yeah,
You're
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you know, we have another question that you kind of touched on a little earlier, or you were actually going down that avenue. You know, many of us vote in the primary elections, you know, vote for president, vice president, and so on. But why is it just as, if not more important, that we're showing up to vote at the local and state levels as well?
I'll take a stab at that real quick. Lakeila basically summed it up when she said all politics is local. I think that, and I know personally, coming from working for a congressperson, a lot of, I would say 95% of the constituent calls I get are about local and state issues. So people always want to go to like the big top person, but the people that really could make the change, or where even some of the federal dollars are getting spent to, are dispensed to, are on the local and state level. So I was raised, I'm a Southern girl. I was raised, you vote in every election, because it's different needs that are being met depending on what that office is. And that was part of my civic education that I was learning from my grandmother and my great grandmother, because then I knew the importance and the difference between the school board and the city council, or the mayor and my congressperson. So, I mean, when we're thinking about dollars, like Lakeila said, and these different projects, a lot of that money is on the local level, and a lot of the power and influence truly is on the local level. And I'm not saying that just because I don't want no more constituent calls, but I'm saying that because that's the truth.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions that have been submitted? Okay, we're about halfway, a little more than halfway in. I'm going to just circle back to a couple of areas that I want to talk about a little more. You know, this past year, we have had to adjust life like I don't think anyone could ever have imagined due to the pandemic. And I know that our current administration is working very hard to get vaccines out into the communities and ensure that everyone is able to get vaccinated. So, you know, we started off with frontline workers, the healthcare, transportation workers being able to get those vaccinations first. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing out there, particularly in the minority communities, as it relates to being able to have access to the vaccines?
I would say that, you know, a lot of times you have to just look at one, you know, who's in office, right? Because it's your local government that is determining the distribution of where the vaccines are going. And so, you know, it's when you're talking about equity in when you're talking about equity and distribution, you also have to talk about education, right? And the same that Charlyn was talking about earlier about voter suppression and misinformation, there has to be a campaign where we're having honest discussions about the vaccine, its safety, because at the end of the day, there is a mistrust in the Black community when it comes to the healthcare system, whether it's because of the fact that Black women can go to the hospital and can make, you know, and say they're in pain, and a doctor or a nurse is like, oh, you're not in pain. Or they accuse us of wanting drugs because we are a drug addict, or, you know, just inadequate healthcare in general when it comes to the Black community. So there is some distrust there. And so there is, on one side of the coin, there are people who are not signing up because they don't trust the vaccine. They don't trust, you know, they don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, and understand this. I completely, wholeheartedly, I understand their hesitation. I get it. But I will tell you that we have to be very mindful and very careful and very honest with our family and friends. I have friends who are like, I don't know about the vaccine. And my question to them is, if you get gel nails or you have a relaxer, you're putting chemicals in your body that you're worried about, that you're not concerned with, it doesn't make sense to me. It's like a contradiction. But at the same time, I tell them, listen, I know how many people even personally have died of COVID. I don't know anybody who's died of the vaccine. And I'm a pro-vaxxer. Listen, I've already had my shot. I'm actually getting my second shot in 2 days. Charlyn is fully vaccinated. So it's a conversation of one, we need to go out and get the vaccine. We need to show up. We need to do our due diligence to figure out, how do you get your grandmother signed up to get her vaccine? How do you sign up to get the vaccine? That's one. But two, also realize that, I am from the state of Missouri, and there are issues in Missouri that we're seeing where, the governor is ensuring that rural areas have the vaccine. However, large cities like St. Louis, Kansas City, that are minority, don't have access, or they're having to drive 2 to 3 hours to get the vaccine. And it's like, what's going on here, right? Or you're seeing more vaccine distribution in higher income areas, where in lower income areas, you're getting, a smaller amount of vaccines. But you also have to look at, where are the healthcare centers around the area? Like Charlyn and I both live in the Washington, D.C. area. And if you want to look at hospitals and healthcare facilities in D.C. east of the river, which is, predominantly African American, the question is, why is it that I can live in Upper Northwest on 16th Street and there's all kinds of vaccines and all the hospitals, but when you go east of the river, there's one hospital and very few vaccines. So everybody's competing to get this small amount of vaccines. But if I go around the corner up the street, there's an abundance. And so that all comes down to, who are your elected officials, who are making those decisions. And at the end of the day, if there is not someone like you at the table, somebody else who can voice and advocate for you, somebody else is going to give you what they think you should deserve. And I think we've all seen that in play. Char.
You said it. You said everything.
Sorry.
Okay, so we do have, thank you for that. Very, very enlightening. Another question that has been submitted. You mentioned constituent calls. How much does that influence the views of office holders?
You want the real? No, sorry.
So Char, let me ask you this too, right? And I love this question. I think, Linda, thank you for asking this, because Char, I want to know too. So you always see like social media campaigns where it's, call your senator or write this letter, here's the form, you can hit submit. Do you all track those things in your offices? Do members of Congress actually tally in total, like the calls that are coming in from their constituents, or like letters that come in? What's the methodology behind that? And how does the representative then vote? How does that impact their votes on the floor?
That's a good question. So twofold, I have two different answers. So do we track it? Yes. So each office kind of creates whatever their own tracker is, so they can tally up how many calls that they've gotten for the particular elected official to vote yay or nay on whatever bill it is. The House side, we don't have as many resources as the Senate side. So sometimes when you call the Senate, you're literally just getting a voicemail, or like a voicemail machine. More than likely, if you call the House of Representatives, you may get a live voice. The second part of my answer, because Lakeila hit the nail on the head, is I think sometimes your campaign has to be targeted to some type of action. So for example, when George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was coming on the floor a couple of weeks ago, my office was getting so many calls. Is the Congresswoman voting yay on this? Yes, she's voting on it. She's a co-sponsor of the bill. She's a Congressional Black Caucus member. This is a bill coming through the Congressional Black Caucus. You have her support. I can't say this, but part of me, and Lakeila knows this, wants to say, well, call the Senate side where the bill gets moved over once it's passed in the House to the Senate side, and it's kind of shaky for us. that's where we could kind of use the energy. So, you know, speaking as an organization, as a group, if you're making these constituent calls for a particular elected official to take a certain action, be targeted and just think about what you want that result to be and what you can actually effectuate, right? So if we're looking at the same bill, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and you're looking at the Senate side where they say everything dies in the Senate, you may want to call a Cory Booker who sits on Senate Judiciary Committee, or call a Tim Scott that also sits on that committee that's taken the pen on that bill once it got sent from the House to the Senate side.
Yvette, you're on mute.
That was so good. It's a roadmap, right? And I think that you know, the educational system in various states are very, very different when it comes to politics. You know, you go down to DC area, and I don't care what radio station you put on, what school you're in, what age group you're talking to, politics is somewhere built in. And I know in New York, it's no longer like that. You know, you might have one class here and there that kind of talks about social studies and the government structure, and then that's it. And then a few years later, you know, you might have another US history class or something like that. But to really get down into the full roadmap of how do you make law, and how is legislation, what are those steps in which legislation takes place, is really something that I think, you know, is part of that voter registration and voter awareness that we were talking about earlier, is so very important. So thank you very much for sharing that. What else do we have? How can we attract younger women, high school and college, to get involved in politics? Any programs or anything that you guys are working on with any of the DOEs?
I'm gonna let Lakeila go.
Okay, so I was gonna say Higher Heights, we do a leadership fellows program. Last year, 2020 was our inaugural program, but that was with adult women who are seniors in their professional careers, who may be looking to transition into the political ecosystem. But I will say that you know, we support other organizations that actually, you know, mentor and encourage younger women to be involved in the political process. We typically host, it's called a salon conversation, and we should be doing them. I don't have it scheduled yet, but we will be doing them again in New York prior to the mayoral primary. We did them last year. It was the very first time we did them virtually, but we did it before the New York primary. But it is literally still, you know, having mothers, aunts, mentors, talking to their mentees, their daughters, their nieces, their godchildren, talking to them about the importance of voting, but also encouraging women to take younger women to the polls with them, right? A lot of times your first exposure to the political process or to voting is because someone took you to the voting booth with them. Like when I was a kid, I knew the importance of voting because guess where I was on voting day, on election day? I was going to the polls with my mother, or my grandparents were activists in their own rights. And so I learned, you know, my love of the political process, my love of voting and voter protection kind of stemmed from there. But it's like you introduce that habit and the importance of it yourself. Like we are obligated to bring other women with us. We are obligated to encourage, nurture young women, especially college age women, to, you know, hone in on their leadership skills, whether it's public speaking. If you have a young lady who's like, oh, I want to run for office one day, I will say, invest and pour into her, because she very well may be, the next Kamala Harris, and she won't be vice president, she might be president. And so it is on us. It is our obligation to invest and pour into younger women. And if there isn't a program in your area, I challenge you to form one, right? We all have to start somewhere. And if it's not there, build it, right? And the people will come.
Right, yes, agreed. And Yolanda, she comments also and says civic isn't taught in our schools, and it should be. So
Again,
a
that's an
charge.
election issue, right? Like, who's over the state, the state education, the curriculum, who's making that determination? Who made the determination to take civics out of school, right? So the question is, who are you leaving your children's education up to? Like, are you investing in paying attention to who's running for school board, or are you just
So
like,
this is a very good question right now, because I know that New York City's school chancellor has stepped down, and so we have an interim, and I'm assuming we're going to be looking at who's going to be that next person in charge. How would someone, what would be those steps that parents would actually take in order to put something into a curriculum that they felt was strongly should be a part of that curriculum?
I'm
want me to-
full disclosure, I'm Shar and I are both attorneys by trade. Shar, you can handle this, but I'm just going to be honest with you, just to level set. Like, unless you have a seat at the table, outside of maybe a petition, I don't know how you are going to, as a parent, change curriculum, right? Unless you are at PTO meetings, school board meetings, and advocating for that. That's, Shar, that's the only way I can see you getting curriculum changed, is you become an advocate and you find a way to have a seat at the table where they're making decisions.
Absolutely what Lakeila said, and it has me thinking back to, it's part of that voter education and awareness, like studying your website for your school board. When they have their public meetings, going to their public meetings, seeing what is on the agenda for the public meetings, seeing if you're able to add an agenda item to that public meeting. Sometimes it's the commission that may do something in addition to, or council in addition to the school board. That's why Lakeila mentioned everything is local, because those key building blocks that affect us every day is really on the local level that the change is effectuated.
Good. And I'll add to that also, because as a parent, I was very involved in the Parent Teachers Association growing up. And there's regular monthly meetings, and those meetings have to be public. That's where your voice starts. And it's in your district, but those districts roll up to the state, and the states have conferences, PTA conferences and things like that as well. And I also sat on a school board as well. And again, we are the voices for the parents who are saying what they like or what they don't like. And that's, those individuals who take those board positions or those PTA positions, they're the advocates. They're the advocates to say, we have parents in our district who don't like X and they want to change it, and this is what they'd like to see. So that's where it starts. Definitely, Yolanda, you and I can talk some more afterwards. So definitely follow up with me on that. Okay, Albert puts in the public and private sectors, many women have entered fields that have been historically dominated by men. To what extent can politicians ensure that needs specific to women are recognized and addressed?
I mean, I think that it's simple, listening to your women constituents, listening to an organization like Higher Heights or different groups that come in and that talk about what key issues are important to them. A lot of people may not know this, but a lot of concepts that elected officials get for bills and when they're passing legislation comes from a local level, or it comes from a certain constituent, individual, organization. A lot of stuff that I've worked on in the Congresswoman Clark's office have been ideas that I've gotten from constituents in our district. So I think listening to women and also just being open to whatever ideas they may have.
Okay, awesome. There are a couple of more comments that I want to just make sure we get. Someone wrote the SLT. What's the SLT? You want to unmute yourselves and tell me what that is?
All right, so this is Fiona.
Hey,
The
Fiona.
SLT is a school leadership team that every school has once you go to public school, from elementary all the way through high. In order to get civic into your school, whichever school your child attends, you must be on the SLT, and the SLT is the one that writes the curriculum for the school. So each school has a school leadership team and they write the curriculum for your child's school. So if you wanted to be in the curriculum, you have to go through the SLT because they're the ones who set the curriculum each school year.
Got
And it can be
Okay.
added. It doesn't matter what, it could be music. It could be something else that you want there.
Awesome.
You know, it could be religion, whatever you want, it has to go through the school leadership team.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Fiona. And then we have Greg made the comment, curriculum changes are hard to influence in the New York City public schools. In the suburbs and private schools, you have a better chance. All right. We are coming to a close of our evening, and I really, really, truly want to thank both Charlyn and Lakeila for their time this evening. I thought it was a very informative program. I thank you for sharing. I will turn it over to our president to close us out. Rich?
Well, okay, thank you. Yes, thanks again for joining us this evening and passing on such important information. And I sat here just smiling and grinning because I come from the school where, I was taught that all politics are local, right? It's from your school boards to your community boards. Those are the folks who really lead legislation, right? Because it's meeting the needs of the population, the people who are voting, because they have the power. So I agree with you 100% that all politics are local. Tonight, it was great because what we learned tonight is that, one, voting is important, right? We all have to understand that voting is important. But what's critical is knowing what you vote for. And knowing what you vote for on the local level, to the state level, to the federal level is extremely important. And tonight's conversation, it's great, right? It was phenomenal to me, because like we opened up this whole conversation, it's like, as evidenced over the past couple of years, right? The political landscape has been reshaped by a particular demographic, and that's women. And to be more specific, Black women, right? And we can witness this from the efforts of Stacey Abrams, what she did in Georgia, to finally electing our first Black Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, right? And there was a whole lot of activities in between. So, I just applaud you, Charlyn and Lakeila, for all that you do to make sure that, this conversation stays timely and relevant, right? And I can tell you, when it comes to my household, the leader of my household was my mom, right? And you're right. I was on her hip going to those voting polls too as a young child. And I knew the importance of the vote back then. But I just want to say, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This was a great conversation. I hope we can do some more of these things. What's coming up in New York is this ranked choice voting. And we're going to have to drill down on this and make sure everyone understands that process, because things are changing, because that's what this pandemic has basically put out there for us. So we have to change a lot of things that we do, and we have to remain resilient, as the voters. So I want to say thank you and appreciate you and look forward to more collaboration.
Thank
Yvette,
you. Thank you
for
again,
great
having us.
job
Thank
this evening.
you. Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you all.
I will just say this. I did get a message from one of our attendees who said, I have to go and do my village voting tomorrow.
Yes.
So we've inspired many of people who have joined us this evening, and that word will just continue to spread. Thank you, Simone, for that.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Good night,
Take
all.
care.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.